Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Mike Yanakopoulos, and we have Konstantinos Baraktaris with us. I'm a senior product manager at Transifex, and together with Kostas, which he's a senior developer, we're going to talk about Transifex Native and the architecture that we use on the backend, and then move on with an example of this architecture in JavaScript, in the JavaScript SDK. So that's it for me. Please participate with any questions in the chat. I will be looking into it. And I'm passing it on to Kostas to get started. So thank you for being here again.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kostas. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. I'm a senior developer at Transifex, and I have been involved with Transifex Native since its very inception. It has been a very exciting project for us. It has allowed us to work with many interesting technologies, and it has given us the chance to envision how localization can work in a truly modern environment. So, this talk today is going to be about the Transifex Native SDK. It would be reasonable to assume that most of you are familiar with what Transifex Native is, but I think it's worth doing an introduction to put this particular presentation in context. So, with Transifex Native, what you're expected to do is that you take a library or an SDK from us, from Transifex, and you put it inside your application. And this makes your application capable of communicating with Transifex directly for its localization needs. So while previously you would have to use a tool to extract translatable content from your source code and into a file, and then find a way to upload the file to Transifex, probably in an automated way, and then get the translation files from Transifex and put them in your application. Now it's the application itself that does this. So at some point, you will instruct your application to extract the translatable content and push it to Transifex. And then when the application is running, the application itself will pull the translated content from Transifex and display it. So this gives a lot of capabilities, very exciting capabilities. For example, it means that the translations that are available while the application is running might not be the same as the ones that were available when the application was released. So you can release an application with a few languages supported. This is especially helpful for mobile apps. And then as the application runs on the user's devices, it will pull the translations. So if in the meantime more languages have been added in Transifex, the application will be able to show them over the air. So this is, as I said, very exciting, but there is a sort of elephant in the room. It was the statement I started with, which is that we get to give you an SDK and you get to put it in your application, which is a responsibility that we do not take lightly. We need this SDK. We need you to feel safe doing that. So this is an SDK that must be secure, obviously. It must be free of bugs. It must perform well. And you must be able to understand how it works and what it does. The first decision we made, which was obvious, was to make these SDKs open source from the start. Right now we have two SDKs, one for Python and one for JavaScript. And on top of these, we have built integrations for the Django web development platform and the React development platform. This was because these are technologies that we use in Transifex itself, so we can use them to localize Transifex and eat our own dog food, essentially. But also they make a lot of sense for most of the prospects that we have talked to have mentioned JavaScript and React as something that they would be very interested in. So when we made our first SDK, the Python one, we pretty much went in blind. We just wrote the code as we went, as we discovered what we would need for the SDK to work. But when we started working on the second one, we took a step back and we looked at what the similar patterns are in these two SDKs. And we realized that we would like to get the community as involved as possible with these SDKs for the reasons I mentioned before. So we thought that it would be a very good idea to create a document, what we call the SDK development guide, so that this serves a number of purposes. One is that if you are using this SDK and you're interested in understanding how it works, this guide is going to be very helpful to you. And if by chance there is a bug that you need to fix, or you want to create the SDK in a new language or framework, you don't have to wait for us to do that. Since everything is open source, you can do it yourselves. And again, the guide is going to be a very big help. The other thing is that we want all SDKs, regardless of whether it's SDKs that we have developed or the community has developed, we want them to have a level of consistency with each other. So if a developer is familiar with the JavaScript SDK and they have to move on to a Python project, they have the ability to do so, and the localization part of the application will have the same interface because both SDKs are implemented using the same patterns. So we went ahead and released this document. It is here. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to share the links, the relevant links in the end. And this talk is about the document, what decisions we made, how we wrote it, and we're going to also have a look at the contents. So, which means that we're going to be talking about how a Transifex Native SDK is typically structured. So, moving on. If you open the SDK guide, this is one of the first things you're going to encounter. Is that this diagram explains like the functional components of a typical Transfix Native SDK. Now, in the document just below this diagram, there is a sentence that says that it doesn't mean that every box here needs to be a separate module or a class in your code. This is just to highlight what the functional components are and what they do, so that when we mention them later in the document and explain the responsibilities and the expected inputs and outputs of each one, we can know what it's referring to. So starting here, this is the core object. We find it helpful for you to be able to import an object from our library and interact mainly with this. So everything that every time your application interfaces with Transfix Native is going to happen through this object, which mainly uses the interface provided by the other objects to perform its work. So here on the left, we have what we call the T function. The T function is our replacement for getText or other functions. Most localization frameworks have this function that performs two tasks. One is to mark a string as translatable, so that later you can extract it into a file. And the other thing is that during runtime, when the application is running, this function will actually pull the translation and show it in place of the string, which is its arguments. So our T function performs the same function. The only difference is that you do not extract the string into a file. You just push it to Transifex, which we will see later. A small component here, the lang state, this maintains the available languages for your application, and it can do so either by a list that you have hard-coded in it, or it can get the list of available languages from Transifex, or it can do a combination of both. It is usually a simple component. Now, when the T function is called, the SDK will do two things. One thing is it will pull the available translations from the cache. So the cache is the caches we have implemented until now are very simple. They're just based on memory, but we have made them usually in a way that you can change them for a more complicated cache. And this will be filled by Transifex by something that's called the CDS handler. So the CDS stands for Content Delivery Service. This is a service that we have implemented. It sits in front of the Transfix API and acts essentially as a proxy to the Transfix API. Now, all the information that the CDS handler can get from the CDS, it could also get from the API, but the CDS formats its responses in a way that is more convenient for Transfix native integrations to work, and also it acts as a second level of cache so that the translations can be served faster. So ideally, at some point during the beginning of the application, the CDS handler will pull translations from the CDS and will put them into the cache. So then the T function can get that translation from the cache and display them. Now, the rest of the boxes here, the string renderer, has to do with the fact that translations sometimes are not actually translations. They are what we call translation templates, which means that if you have a translation that includes a parameter inside it, for example, a username or a number or something that is dynamically generated by the application, then that translation will be a template to render your actual message. So here, the string renderer needs to combine the translation template with the rest of the information to generate the final string. And for that purpose, we are using the ICU message format, which is a standard in localization. And usually your SDK will need to delegate this function to a third-party library which specializes in ICU message format. We have some examples for this in our document. And the last part is this bit here, which I mentioned in the introduction. This is the part where your application extracts translatable content from your source code and pushes it to Transfix via the CDS. So pushing happens through the CDS, but extracting, again, it's a slightly complicated matter, and it differs from language to language. For example, for our Python SDK, Python comes with a module in its standard library called AST that allows you to analyze Python code with Python, which was very helpful for us. For JavaScript, we used a third-party library which does the same thing, but this, as I said, this is going to be different from SDK to SDK. So moving on, we would like to say a few things about the decisions we made while writing the SDK, how it could be most helpful to the community in order to understand how to read and how to write SDKs. So one of the decisions we made was that within the document, we are using pseudocode to demonstrate how the various components should work. We thought of using Python because, first of all, it's a very expressive language. And secondly, we would be able to copy-paste parts of our Python SDK. But we decided to make our document as language agnostic as possible, so that it would we would not make any assumptions for someone implementing an SDK in a different language. The other thing is that throughout the document, there are cases where we have pieces of input and output that you can feed to these components that I showed before, so that if you're writing your own unit test, you can get started with these. We explained that if you feed like the renderer this, you should get this, so you can simply copy paste them in your test suite and verify that everything is working correctly. And the last bit is that the last page of the SDK guide has a detailed explanation of the CDS, the Content Delivery Service, its API, exactly what endpoints it supports, what inputs it expects, and what it is supposed to return. So moving on, we will take a look at our JavaScript SDK. As I mentioned, the Python SDK, we wrote it on the fly, and then we wrote the JavaScript SDK in parallel with the document. So it has been very influential. So all the components that I mentioned before are going to be in the SDK. We're actually going to go and visit the source code. We will not spend a lot of time on it. I'm just going to highlight that whatever part is in the code base here is what we talked about already. So this is the Transfix JavaScript repository. It's open source, as I mentioned before. And it is structured in a way that is called a monorepo, which means that it hosts several node packages in the same code repository. So node packages is what you use in order to install a library for a JavaScript application. So we have 3 packages here. Native is what is the low-level JavaScript SDK, which all JavaScript applications and all JavaScript integrations are going to use. React is the React integration for JavaScript. It uses native as a dependency. And the CLI are the parts that extract the text and push it to Transifex. So if you go to native, we can see here, this is the core object. So as we mentioned, some of the core components are bundled inside this core class. Here is where you do all the setting up, and this is the T function, essentially. It's called translate, but it's alias to T later on. And the various parts of the functionality are implemented as methods here, and so on. Now, an interesting thing is here where we start a new cache object. The cache has been implemented as a separate class, which can be found here. It is a simple class, but it follows the interface that the SDK guide is showing. And so the bottom, I don't want to get into too many details, but the bottom line is that if you are trying to understand how all of this works, having the SDK guide is going to be a very big help. And this was our goal. So now, if you allow me, I will do a demo. We're going to do the React demo because it's one of the most exciting ones. Let me set up my windows for a bit. And here we go. We have made this demo using a toolkit which is called Create React App. It is the easiest way to get a React application up and running. And let me bring this up. Essentially, what we have here is some text, nothing more than that, and some buttons that don't do anything right now. And there is a text box here that, as we type into it, we see that the output is updated here. So we want to take this page and integrate it with Transifex Native. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import the T component. The React package. Now, the T component is an extension over the T function. So the T function is a low-level function that the low-level SDK defines. For React, we have a component called T, which provides this functionality. But as you will see, it also takes advantage of some of the features of React. So we're going to take this string here, and we're going to wrap it in the T component. And we're going to do the same thing with this string here. So we're going to save our file and go back to our application. Nothing actually changed for a number of reasons. The main reason is that there are no translations ready yet. And we have not set up this application to communicate with Transifex. But before we do even that, we're going to add another thing. We're going to import the main Transifex native object from the native library. And here, to save time, I had already written this as a comment. This is where we initialize the connection with Transifex. And we're going to go down to those 2 buttons here and add some functionality to them. Essentially, now we told the application that when we click these buttons, we want to set the current language to be English or Greek, respectively. So now we're going to save the application. And again, nothing actually happened. Although this application is connected to Transifex right now, there are no translations available. So let's go ahead and fix that. We're going to go into the command line, and we're going to use the command line application that extracts strings and pushes them to Transifex. This happens by this command. Let's display the help text first to show what we can do. But in order to run it, we have to add a few options. And I'm also going to add the verbose flag so that we can get more details of what's going on. And the final argument is the directory we want to scan for translatable content. Now, the tokens is how the application authenticates with a specific project in Transifex. And we will see that. Actually, let's see that now. It's this project right here, the TX Native Demo, which as of now has one language, and it has no translation. So if we visit the editor, this project right now is empty. But when we run this command, we can see that it detected our two strings, the one that we had wrapped with a T component, and that it has pushed them to Transifex. So now we can go to the editor and refresh it. And we can see that the two strings actually appeared here. So let's go ahead and translate them. And now when we go back into our application and refresh it, hopefully when I click Greek, and after, here it is. When we click Greek, the text actually has been replaced with the translations. And the interactive elements of the page keep working. So one of the interesting things here that React allows us to do is that you don't have to refresh the page every time you change the language. The fact that the T component is a React component means that it can detect changes in the selected language and re-render itself. This is something that is not necessarily feasible in all SDKs and all frameworks. And this just highlights that sometimes every integration can be a little bit unique and add on top of the base Transfix Native integration. So moving on, we're going to keep tweaking this application a bit. This is nice, but we can do another thing. If we don't want to hard code every language by hand, we can use something from the React integration called use languages. So this is what it's called a React hook. I'm not going to go into details, but the bottom line is that this variable here will eventually hold the list of available languages. And when it does, we can use it to display whatever, to access it and use it to display things. So here I'm going to do a for loop essentially. So every language has a code and a name, and I'm using the same button I implemented before, but instead of hard coding the codes and names, I can use them as variables now. So even though we still have to hard code the source language, the rest of the languages are going to be generated dynamically. So now going back to the application, nothing actually changed. Again, we are seeing the Greek and English languages. But the interesting thing here is that I'm not going to be touching the code of the application again, but I am going to go to Transifex and add a new language. So languages. Now going back to our application, if I refresh, we will see that not only is the Greek language available, but French is available as well, and that it also works. Again, with the dynamic elements being dynamic, Greek is still available as before. And the final thing that I'm going to demonstrate is a little utility we have made, which is called a language picker, which essentially allows us to get rid of the buttons. And so this is a React component, language picker, that you can use in order, what we did before by hand, actually it is ready for you with this. It will detect the available languages and work. It's not implemented as buttons, it's implemented as a drop-down, but it has the same functionality as before. Okay, so I think this is it from me. I will hand over back to Mike.
Okay, thank you, Konstantinos. That was a great presentation. And before jumping on to what's next, actually, let me get this out of me so that we can move on to questions. So, where we're currently standing with Transfix Native is what you just saw with what Konstantinos just showed us. We have implemented SDKs for Django, Python, JavaScript, and the React components on top of that. What we want to do next is we want to explore more functionalities around Transfix Native, especially things that can make native being more production ready, like key support or anything else that could pop up as feedback from you. Also, we would like to support and extend the existing SDKs based on what we get from this webinar and any other feedback or issues that pop up from interacting with more people, so that we can make them more solid. And we will see how we move on with the next integration. That's why I have added a poll in the webinar. So please vote. We're going to move forward with supporting more frameworks based on your input. That's why it's really valuable. And yeah, basically that's it. We have thought of many functionalities that are currently not there yet for Transfix Native, and we want them to be in place. We have them designed, and we're going to start building them based on the priorities that do pop up. So yeah, that's it about our next steps. We can move on to questions. So, Konstantinos, could you please?
Yes, of course. Okay, so the first question is, will the React package replace the Transfix Live snippet? So in terms of functionality, obviously Transfix Live has a very big overlap with Transfix Native. But the main difference being that Transfix Native is supposed to run on any language and any platform. I assume that once it becomes mature enough, people will want to use Transfix Native instead of Transfix Live. I don't think we have talked about having a deprecation schedule or anything. So until further notice, we are going to keep supporting Transfix Live. But I don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything to this.
In general, this is a completely different technology. So what Transfix Live does is mainly done on the client level of the application. So you can do some stuff, but you cannot do some more sophisticated stuff like marking easily marking variables or placeholders. So it's the two implementations are totally different. So it will not be replaced. It's either you use Transfix Native or Transfix Live, and yeah, that's it. I don't know if this is covered. We can proceed.
Yes. Oh, Mike, do you want to take the next one? Thanks.
Okay. So the next one is, does Transfix Native require a paid Transfix plan? It's open source. So right now, Transfix Native is open source. Some parts are open sourced. Most, actually, the parts that have to do with the SDK and how translations are served are open sourced. We're going to send links via email after the webinar about the respecting repositories. In order to get translations, as of this moment, you will need to use Transfix, but that's not bound specifically to a paid plan. That means that if your plan is open source and you're willing to use native, you will be able to use it with the free plan as well. So the only way that Transfix Native and the Transfix application are currently bound is that's the only way that you can get translations back to Transfix Native service. So Transfix Native service can serve existing translations, but those translations need to be fed by Transfix. We plan to work more on this and see how we can decouple it so that Transfix Native can can be used as a standalone without the need of a Transfix plan.
Okay, let me add a bit to this. So on the development side, it's interesting that almost all our work around Transfix Native is not in the Transifex service. Given that I didn't mention this before, even the CDS is a service that we plan to open source as well. So you would be able to get a Docker image and set it up on your infrastructure, or via any other way. You can set it up if you want your application to have faster access to the cached translations. So in any case, like all the parts of Transfix Native are not implemented inside the Transfix website, the Transfix service. Mainly, all the communication happens through the API. So in theory, like someone else could have implemented Transfix Native and offered it as open source. So if the Transfix API can serve translations, then a Transfix Native application can get them regardless of the plan.
Okay, great. So we don't have any other questions. I don't know, Konstantina, would you like to add something regarding native and the core architecture that we haven't mentioned yet?
Not necessarily. It's just that I would like to repeat that this has been very exciting for us. Usually we work on the Transfix service, so all the kind of problems we are facing have to do with the service itself, make it faster, fix bugs, and so on. The Transfix Native has given us the opportunity to make libraries that other people will use. So it forces us to make our software easy to understand, easy to explain what it is supposed to do. And this was relatively new for us, and it has been very exciting. I am looking forward for people to start using it and giving feedback. And also the end result, for me, it's very exciting, the level of control you have over the localization process. I would like to be a developer using Transfix Native and seeing the outcome.
Great, thank you. On my side, I would like to add that in I don't know, Constantine, in one or today or tomorrow maybe we are releasing also a demo repository where you can jump in and play test with Transfix Native on a sandbox environment we have built, including all the frameworks that are currently supported. I suppose part of what Constantina showed us, the React application will be there too, so that you can play.
It's going to look a lot familiar if you try it.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's it for me too. Unless we have anything else, we can call it a meeting. We can call it a webinar, and we will follow up with the recording of this webinar along with all the related links and material that we have built already. We would like to get your feedback and your input on this webinar on Transfix Native. So please reach out and talk to us. We're willing to help and listen. So that's it from me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And I hope you will try Native and get back to us. So
Thank you for joining us.
So